Good afternoon. Welcome to the February edition in our Supply Chain Management webinar series. A few housekeeping things before we get started. If you have a question during the presentation, raise your hand on your control panel, and I will attempt to answer those questions as they come up. If I don't get to answer your question during the webinar, I'll hang around at the end of the webinar until I've answered all questions. Second thing, if you want to see a replay of this webinar or many of our previous webinars, you can find them on our webinar page on our website. So, let's get started. Today, we're going to do a case study of merging two companies' supply chains. And what we're going to look at is how a growing business drove the need to change suppliers in a critical area. Then we're going to look at the types of things that can happen when you merge two different organizations' supply chains. And the third thing we're going to cover is the benefits in that merging process of having an open communication with the two companies. So let's get started. This is actually a case study of a company that I was vice president of manufacturing and operations in the late 80s, early 90s. Telecom Analysis Systems was a small startup organization. I joined the organization shortly after we moved from the founder's basement, where we were manufacturing the product and doing all the design work, to a small gas station that was converted into office space in a town called Little Silver, New Jersey. It literally sat 10 feet from the railroad track where the commuter trains ran, and the standing joke was that if there was ever a train derailment in that area, our building would be wiped out in an instant. As a small startup organization, we were shipping between 15 and 20 finished units per year. The manufacturing of this high-tech electronics piece of equipment was done by us in this small converted garage gas station, and by a subcontractor of ours that actually did the assembly of our printed circuit boards. This picture on the screen right now is an example of the small job shop that we used, and how they would literally take the printed circuit boards that we sent them, all of the material that we sent them that had to be put into those printed circuit boards. They would do manual insertion of components, they would solder them up, and then they would send them back to us. Now, if you're in the electronics industry or have a background in electronics, you'll know that the picture here is what is called through-hole components, where you actually take the component and put it through a hole in the board. Today, 25 years later, we're all surface mount technology, and it's all done by computers and equipment and everything. But the story of merchant supply chain is the same, whether it's 25 years ago in this stage of electronics manufacturing or the stuff that we do today. During the first couple years that I was with the organization, we grew rapidly. We outgrew this old gas station and actually moved into several units in a local industrial park. As we were growing, there were two other competitors in our product line, telephone network simulators, in the entire world. We were known as the outfit that had the most innovative product, the highest quality, and the quickest on-time delivery. Along with this, our sales grew, especially as we added additional product lines. When I started there, we had one product line, the Model 1010. Shortly after that, we added the Model 100 product line, and a year or so after that, we added the 2010 product line. So our production of units and shipment to the customers rose dramatically from 15 to 20 a year to several hundred a year spread across all of these product lines. And what we needed for our printed circuit board manufacturing was to have the capability to handle several thousand printed circuit boards being made across the period of a year to handle all of these demands that we had from our customers for these various product lines. Our original subcontractor that was doing the assembly of the material was not set up to handle that type of volume, which led us to start looking for a subcontractor that could handle the volume that we needed. And we were fortunate in finding one that was in upstate New York, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And we started the process of figuring out whether they could manufacture printed circuit boards for us, and for them, whether they could actually work with us in how we did business. So, at this stage, we've seen why you would change a key supplier. Now let's look at some of the things that happened over the first 4 months of that change. We were used to dealing with a company that was 20 miles away from us, that if any problems happened, we could literally run over to the facility. It took about 30 minutes to get there and straighten out the problems. This new supplier that we were bringing on board was 300 plus miles away in Rouse's Point, New York, at the southern end of the lakes up there. So, the communication portion of it sometimes got a little hairy to begin with. We sent them an initial run where we could use it from our point to see what they were doing that we had to have them change, and from their point what we were doing that we needed to change. So we sent up an order for 20 printed circuit boards, and several weeks later, actually 8 weeks later, we received the first production run. And from there, that's where we pick up the story about the things that can go wrong. You see, the first thing that we found was that they had a master schedule demand time fence that was actually greater than 2 months long, meaning that anything within from today 2 months out didn't get changed. Now, that was driven by the fact that this company, prior to becoming a contract assembly manufacturer, they have their own product line, and they had a very successful product line in electronics in a different area. They weren't a competitor of ours or anything, and they fixed 2 months as a demand time fence. Nothing got changed within that 2 months window. Well, the first thing we ran into, we're looking for delivery time in 12 to 14 weeks on production quantity orders, so we had a problem there with their demand time fence. Now, on our side, one of the things that we did was, and this example that I've showed here, let me explain that a little bit if you're not in electronics. These are tape and reel resistors. These are resistors. These are the components, some of the type of component that is put in that printed circuit board. They are put in an automatic assembly machine that literally takes these things, cuts them off the tape, the yellow thing on the top and bottom, bends them, and sticks them into the printed circuit board. We were used to dealing with tape and reel, supplying to our first subcontractor. And we were also used to that subcontractor being able to handle the fact that we sent them tape and reel, or if we couldn't find the material In tape and reel, we would actually send them loose, a bag full of resistors. Well, this new supplier that we were dealing with up in Rouse's Point, they could only handle tape and reel, and every time we sent them resistors or the other components that were assembled via tape and reel, and we sent them a mix, it stopped their production completely. Another item we had to deal with was the way that they shipped the finished product to us. When we were dealing with an organization that was literally right in our backyard, 20 miles away, they had a packaging set up for these completed printed circuit boards where all you had to do was cut the top of the box off, and we could literally sit it on the production line, and our production people could take a board out as they needed it and start our remaining production process. Well, this organization shipped them individually wrapped in anti-static padded packs that were stacked one on top of the other in the box, and we couldn't take the box, as was our process, and move it right into production. So that was an issue that we dealt with. And another example, excuse me, of the type issues. In the upper right-hand corner here, we have integrated circuits. Now, back in the late 80s, early 90s, there were many different manufacturers of printed circuits. The same printed circuit could be manufactured by several manufacturers. We had a very robust ERP system that allowed us to show approved substitutes for, you'd have a primary manufacturer for one of these integrated circuits, and then you'd have secondary approved substitutes. And we had a very robust system that allowed us to mix and match. They were literally different items, different internal part numbers, but they showed up for us as this is an approved substitute. When the material would get to our subcontractor in upstate New York, they'd say we had all these shortages and we got material that we didn't need because they didn't have the ability to take our information and see that these were actually authorized substitutes for these parts. So in the course of that first 4 months, we came up with a punch list of over 100 different items that had to be dealt with in their supply chain and our supply chain to make this thing work. So that's where we are. Those are the types of things that can happen. Now, how we got through this is the rest of the story, and this deals with open communication. As I mentioned, our new subcontractor was 300 miles away. So in the 9 months that we were going through this, getting the supply chains merged, we spent, myself, my production manager, my purchasing manager, manufacturing engineer, we spent a lot of time on the Continental Shuttle from Newark up to Albany, and then grab a rental car, usually budget, and drive the additional 80 or so miles up to Rouse's Point to spend time with our customer. They in turn did the same thing coming down to see us. It got to the point that after several meetings, after that first preliminary set of boards that they manufactured, and we were hammering out what the punch list of items were, we took this approach. The second test group of boards, it was another 25 boards. We sent them up. It got there on a Friday night. My production manager caught the Continental Shuttle up to Albany on Sunday afternoon and was there at their facility first thing Monday morning. He spent 3 days there. The theory behind this was we knew that when we sent the job out, we had everything done to our satisfaction. He was there to work with them as they opened up the box, as they put it into production, to find out all the things that our processes were causing problems when they received the material up there. So after that several days up there, he came home. We continued on. About 6 weeks later, we received on a Friday night a shipment of that second set of boards. That Sunday afternoon, one of their manufacturing engineers flew in. They were at our facility at 7 o'clock on Monday morning to work with us in the reverse as we opened up the box so that they could see the things that they were doing, how their processes were causing us problems. It was the open communication like this. We were all dedicated to making this thing happen. That over the period of 9 months, we took that punch list and did away with it. And 9 months to the day after we started, we got our first production run of boards, and they came in flawlessly. This was the beginning of a several-year relationship with this outfit. And the thing that made it a success was that both organizations were willing to change things in their supply chains in order to come up with one supply chain that would be flawless in its execution and beneficial for both organizations. We at that time looked at Rouse's Point as just another production floor. Oh, it just happened to be 300 miles away. The good thing on this, both companies learned a lot of lessons, and it worked in the future because you see several years down the pike, I got a call from the president of the company up there. And he said, Rick, I have good news for you. We have a great relationship. I have a little not so good news in that our business for our primary product, which they have an independent product, has taken off as they entered a new market, and they were going to stop doing contract manufacturing within the next 12 months. So basically they gave me a 12-month period of time to find a new subcontractor. And based on the things that we had learned during this integration of these two supply chains, we were able to identify another subcontractor, qualify them, send them through the prototypes of, matching up our production lines together. We actually managed to do that in a 6-month period of time, that we were able to transition from this great supplier to our next great supplier with very little heartache. So this is what we've covered. We've looked at the things that drive companies to change major suppliers, then the things that can happen when you try to merge two supply chains that haven't worked together before, and finally, how open communication, whether it's a couple miles away or a couple continents away, how that is the key to blending two supply chains to make a profitable business relationship for both organizations. Okay, folks. Well, that's it for this month's webinar. And if you have any questions, I'll stick around. If not, join us again in March for our next webinar, where we're going to be looking at independent demand ordering systems.